Well, I wanted to kick off in a big picture way following that Colonial Pipeline hack to ask simply, how vulnerable is U.S. infrastructure?
Well, as we go into the 2020s, we're going to continue to see cybersecurity issues rank among the other more traditional security issues impacting all of our critical infrastructure. Right now, we're seeing it obviously in the context of pipelines, but really every element of U.S. infrastructure needs to be secured. And it's a challenge in the U.S. because, of course, rightly so, our infrastructure is not all controlled and commanded by the public entities. Often it's in private hands, municipal and state-owned infrastructure. And so it's very important to be coordinating with partners in the private sector, in the state and local levels where so much of our utilities, for example, are managed and run to make sure that they're resilient and robust against any threat.
When you see things like this, do you pause and reconsider the balance of where the money's going in the infrastructure bill and think more of it should be on protection as opposed to rebuilding, as it were?
Well, I think they go hand in hand. The more we are able to develop a resilient and robust infrastructure, the more secure it will be as well. In the same way that at a personal level, if you have a phone or a computer that hasn't been updated lately in terms of software, it's more vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. Not only is that literally true in the fact that software systems need to be updated continually for infrastructure too, but I think it's a metaphor for the bigger picture of where we are as a country. 20th century infrastructure is going to be especially vulnerable. And it's why we need to be planning to future-proof the assets that we have around the country and make sure, especially from an energy perspective, that we have an all-of-the-above strategy that's moving us toward less vulnerable, more resilient, and, of course, more renewable sources.
Secretary Buttigieg, just on this current situation that is unfolding as we speak, your department has made some moves to make it easier for trucks and boats to get to the East Coast and get the fuel. Is that a worry that we could see shortages, especially in places like Atlanta, for cities, for airports, as we enter the third day of this issue?
So the administration's working in a whole of government manner to do everything we can to prevent any kind of disruptions from emerging. And while the Department of Energy has had to lead, we've been in touch with them and Homeland Security, everybody bringing what they can to the table. What we were able to do in the Department of Transportation was create some flexibility to make it easier for trucks to be able to move and serve where they need to. And as was indicated earlier in the story, of course, we're watching closely and ready to cooperate and help in any way that we can as the pipeline operators pursue this plan to get back up and running.
Secretary Buttigieg, we were meant to, of course, talk to you on Friday after the jobs report. Now, clearly, it was a positive report moving in the right direction, but significantly behind where expectations were. To what extent do you put that down or accept the criticism some are suggesting that there's just too much stimulus out there in the system at the moment?
Well, remember, we are something on the order of 8 million jobs behind where we were coming out of the pandemic. So the idea that we've somehow done too much to bring back the economy just doesn't seem consistent with the facts on the ground that we're seeing. What we have right now is a real challenge to continue emerging from what amounts to the most severe economic shock of our lifetimes. And it's not something we're going to overcome in one day or in 100 days, although it is remarkable that over the course of this administration, we've seen on average job creation on the order of 500,000. But it's not like we're just going to say, OK, now our work is done. It's why we need to make sure in the short term we're deploying the rescue plan dollars that were authorized by Congress that are going out as we speak to deal with some of these economic contingencies. And it's why this is a great time to pass the American Jobs Plan that's really about making sure that we have a more robust and resilient economy for years and even decades to come.
Well, it's not so much that the administration is doing so much, but it's so much on the unemployment side of things. The Chamber of Commerce, for instance, wants you to now scrap the extra $300 per week in bump to the unemployment benefits to incentivize people to go out and look for work. Do you buy that argument? And is it something, do you think, the administration would consider?
We don't think making life any worse for hard-hit American workers is the answer here. What we need to do is make sure that we're deploying the resources that we have and guiding everybody in that safe return to workplaces that's going on across the country as much as can responsibly happen. Remember, for example, if you have been offered a job and turn away a safe and suitable job, that means you're no longer eligible for these kinds of unemployment benefits. That's something that hasn't changed. And as you look at all of the different interacting economic forces going on as we emerge from this historic shock, there's been no conclusive finding or evidence that that is the main, let alone the only driver of what's going on right now. We need to do two things. One is to make sure that we are supporting Americans seeking to put food on the table who've gone through horrific economic and personal shocks, and, of course, make sure our economy gets back up and running on terms that are sustainable for the future.
So part of that is going to be getting businesses to hire. You said it yourself. There's still 8.2 million jobs that have not been filled. Is now really the time to saddle business with more than $2.7 trillion in tax increases over the next 15 years in an effort to do it?
Yeah, I've noticed those in the world of trying to keep these tax breaks for corporations and the wealthy. When the economy's doing well, they say, hey, now's not the time, the economy's doing well. And when we're in trouble, they're saying, now's not the time, the economy's in trouble. Look, here's what we know. Through thick and thin, up and down, American business has been extremely competitive at corporate tax rates in the 30s or even the 40s. We're calling for a corporate tax rate of 28%. And we're calling for closing the loopholes that have a lot of corporations paying zero even when they make billions in profits. We know that this reasonable level, not high level, but reasonable level of taxes is what is needed in order to fund the infrastructure plan that the president has put forward. Now, we're also interested to hear other ideas and welcoming people bringing other ideas to the table in this negotiating season. The only red line for the president is that he will not accept a proposal to raise taxes on Americans making less than $400,000 a year, especially when we still have so many enormous tax breaks on the books for corporations and the wealthy that have never delivered on what was advertised for them in terms of economic growth, and that have really crippled our ability to fund important priorities that we can't afford not to do. We as a country, including, by the way, the business community, cannot afford for us to continue going on with increasingly third-rate infrastructure in the U.S.
Mr. Secretary, just to switch focus, the UK announced its new travel rules last week, and the US, to somewhat many people's surprise, was not on their new green list. And some over the weekend have suggested that's because you and your counterpart, Grant Shapps, are discussing a dedicated bilateral travel corridor between the US and the UK. Is that in the works?
So nothing's been decided or negotiated. There are conversations with many international partners about the concept of travel corridors. It's one option in terms of ways to make sure that there's a safe return to international travel. Look, the reality is that reopening and restoring travel routes, it's going to be much more complex and multi-layered than it was to close them down in the first place, because different countries are in different positions in terms of progress with vaccines, and of course, sometimes we're seeing setbacks in terms of infection rates. I think we all want to see a safe return to international travel. I sure do, after all, I'm the Secretary of Transportation. But we need to make sure that it's safe. We need to make sure that we have systems that talk to each other in terms of how we verify that somebody's had a negative test, or if somebody wants to show proof of vaccination. These are the kinds of conversations that are happening both bilaterally with other countries and in the multilateral convenings that are going on, so that we can get this right and be as efficient as we can in an incredibly complex process.
Just quickly, why is the UK then still on level 4 do not travel? It's the same category that India's in. Dates back to March last year for the UK when it was put to that status, when it has one of the best developed world statistics on all measures when it comes to COVID.
So again, the process of releasing or relaxing these restrictions is going to be a lot more complex and multi-stage than the process of imposing them was. But I'll tell you that there is a constant conversation about how to make sure we're reaching responsible levels of opening, and the sooner that we can safely and responsibly and fairly do it, the better. Our best means to do that, of course, is to have continued progress on vaccination in our country and in every country, and it continues to be imperative, even as we celebrate the the good news of coming up on that 50% mark of Americans at least partially immunized. We know we have a long way to go, and we've got to double down right now.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.